Number 8. Amber Cook. In a vicious catfight that was captured on video in 2016, a Florida woman named Amber Cook was attacked outside a residence by an unidentified woman who rushed up to her and tried punching her in the face. Cook dropped her phone on the ground and began striking the other woman before throwing her into the air and slamming her down onto a curb. By then, it was clear who'd won the fight, but Cook apparently wasn't done. She held the woman's hair in one hand while continuing to strike her with the other. At one point, the woman could be heard telling Cook to let go of her hair while maintaining an impressively calm demeanor. Cook flipped her over one more time and then struck her in the face repeatedly while the woman shouted to let go of her. Just when the woman stood up and began walking away, and it seemed like the fight might finally be over, Cook struck her several more times. This continued to happen as the woman repeatedly tried getting away from Cook, and the fight finally ended when the man filming the disturbing video decided things had gone far enough and separated the two. Unfortunately, though, it's unclear what part of Florida the fight happened in, how it started, or if anyone was arrested. Number 7. Shaya Sims. In April 2015, 28-year-old Shaya Sims entered a funeral home on Creek Native American territory near Tulsa, Oklahoma, when a wake was being held for her husband's ex-girlfriend, 38-year-old Tabitha Lynch. Sims reportedly believed her husband was having an affair with Lynch prior to her death, and news sources would later describe Sims and Lynch as frenemies. According to authorities, Sims made a cut on Lynch's face from her hairline to her nose, removing some of her hair in the process, and smeared the woman's makeup. She also allegedly removed one of Lynch's toes and cut her chest. A court convicted Sims of several charges, including burglary and desecrating the corpse. She received a 20-year prison sentence, but managed to get her conviction overturned by arguing that state authorities couldn't rightfully prosecute her since the crime occurred on tribal territory. Sims isn't a tribal member, but Lynch was, and it was based on this argument that she was released from prison in 2021. The state continued to fight for its ability to hold Sims accountable to its justice system, and the case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Then, in a landmark ruling in late 2022, the court re-awarded the state some of its power, ruling that it has the authority to prosecute non-tribal defendants who are accused of committing crimes within Oklahoma's 6 tribal territories. So, Sims ultimately lost her court battle and was sent back to prison in early 2023 to finish out her original sentence. Number 6. Sabrina Nicole Floyd. While responding to a call at a residence in Como, Texas late one night in early 2023, Hopkins County deputies arrived to discover that a gate at the front of the property was damaged. 28-year-old Sabrina Nicole Floyd allegedly backed her pickup truck into the gate during a heated argument with her boyfriend. She was mad at him for locking the gate, and she rammed into it with such force that she caused significant damage to the vehicle she was driving. Floyd was charged with violating probation for allegedly using marijuana and methamphetamine, and she was also hit with a criminal negligence charge because there were passengers in the truck when she crashed. As a result, she was sentenced to a year in jail. Number 5. Augustine Garcia. 39-year-old Gladys Rickard was just hours away from marrying her fiancé in 1999 when she was mercilessly gunned down in front of her wedding party in Manhattan's Washington Heights neighborhood. Footage that was meant to capture Rickard's special day instead featured her murder. In the video, Rickard could be seen passing off a bouquet of flowers to one of her bridesmaids just moments before her ex-boyfriend, Augustine Garcia, pulled up in his car and fired 3 bullets into her body. During Garcia's trial for Rickard's murder, his attorneys admitted that their client shot his ex-girlfriend, but claimed that he acted unintentionally in a jealous rage. Even after the jury found Garcia guilty of murder, his lawyers continued urging the court for leniency. One of the attorneys, Fernando Oliver, likened the shooting to a 5-second lapse of judgment by a man who was otherwise known for making good decisions. Describing Garcia as someone who played by the rules, Oliver urged the judge to impose the 30-year minimum sentence. Judge William C. Meehan was clearly unmoved by the impassioned plea, stating, "We sentence crimes, not all the previous events of one's life." He went on to say that he didn't consider Rickard's murder to be a 5-second event, but rather the product of obsession and stalking. So as a result, Garcia was sentenced to life in prison. During the hearing, the convicted killer apologized to Rickard's family and said he would trade his life for hers if he could. He peppered his speech with biblical passages, but it meant little to Rickard's loved ones, who faced a lifetime of heartbreak from Gladys Rickard's death and the lasting emotional trauma from almost getting shot themselves. Number 4. Patrick Andrew LaFleur. When Sandy Musk met Patrick Andrew LaFleur at a bar in Mundy Township, Michigan in 2001, she had no way of knowing he had a history of complaints and arrests for allegedly stalking and attacking women. LaFleur was young, attractive, and kind, and he offered to help Sandy move out of her soon-to-be ex-husband's home. So there wasn't much not to like at first. But the young man's behavior quickly grew obsessive, according to Sandy, who'd later accuse him of calling her non-stop, including at her job, and showing up at her house unannounced at all times of the night. During one argument over some money LaFleur had loaned Sandy to buy a car, he allegedly charged at her and knocked her onto the ground. And on another occasion, Sandy said that LaFleur showed up uninvited at her home as she was about to leave for a family trip to an amusement park. He allegedly told Sandy that she wouldn't be going on the trip unless he came with her. Sandy would later testify that she told LaFleur repeatedly over a several-month period that she no longer wanted to see him, but he refused to take no for an answer, and the morning of May 31st, he stationed himself at Sandy's house and refused to leave. The two argued throughout the day as Sandy repeatedly told LaFleur to leave, but he didn't budge, even when she left to go out to dinner. Shortly after Sandy arrived home to find her ex-boyfriend still sitting in her home, she received a call from her parents. She told them that she feared she'd gotten herself into something that she couldn't get out of. For the next 6 hours, LaFleur brutally beat and tortured Sandy. He struck her in the head, tried gouging her eyes out, choked her, threatened to kill her, and bit off a piece of her ear and spat it back out at her. LaFleur then forced Sandy to drive while telling her that he was going to kill her in the woods. And when the car ran out of gas, Sandy told LaFleur that she had some money back at the house. She rushed out of the vehicle and headed to a neighbor's house at her first given opportunity. LaFleur was caught living under an alias in 2002 after spending 2 years on the run. By then, Sandy had started her life over from scratch, staying at a woman's shelter before she eventually got her own place. The court convicted LaFleur of kidnapping, assault with intent to do great bodily harm, felonious assault, and aggravated stalking. And as a result, he was sentenced to 35 to 60 years in prison, with an earliest possible release date in the year 2038, at the age of 66. Number 3. Chester McKnight and Kenneth Linscott. Engaged teenagers Annette Cooper and Ted Schultz vanished in Logan, Ohio in October 1982. 2 weeks later, the couple's dismembered bodies were found in the nearby Hocking River and in a cornfield about a mile from where they went missing. Sadly, both victims had been shot dead and were then mutilated. Investigators wasted no time zeroing in on Annette's stepfather, Dale Johnson, as their top suspect in the gruesome case. It was known that Johnson disapproved of Annette and Todd being engaged, and rumors claimed that he'd previously been abusive toward his stepdaughter, although the family denied it. Detectives theorized that Johnson murdered Annette and Todd at the family's farm, then put their severed body parts into garbage bags and dropped them off at the locations where they were found. Prosecutors accused Johnson of secretly being in love with Annette and murdering the pair in a jealous rage. But they failed to disclose disputed accounts of the murders, including from witnesses who claimed that the couple were killed at the cornfield where some of their body parts were found, rather than at the Johnson family farm. The court also made the controversial decision to allow the state to present evidence that had been obtained through hypnosis. A 3-judge panel found Johnson guilty and sentenced him to death in 1984. But before that could happen, he won a new trial. The case was dismissed, though, after a judge ruled that a large portion of evidence from the first trial couldn't be presented during the second trial, and Johnson was released from prison. His innocence was finally proven in 2008 when a man named Chester McNight confessed to the double murder. He told law enforcement that he was motivated to kill the teens so that there would be no witnesses to his brutal assault against Annette. McNight, who was already serving prison time for other crimes, pleaded guilty and received 2 life sentences. Kenneth Linscott, who helped dismember the bodies, was sentenced to time served for misdemeanor abuse of a corpse. Number 2. Adrien Robinson. In March 2003, 56-year-old father of 4 Henry Robinson was found dead in the bathtub of his Hamilton, Georgia home with 16 bullet wounds to his body. That same day, a pair of nuns named Philomena Fogarty and Lucy Christophic were kidnapped from their home. Lucy escaped unharmed, while 64-year-old Philomena's body was found in a sleeping bag in a Virginia Beach parking lot 3 days later. To make matters worse, her head, hands, and feet had been severed. The day after Philomena's body was found, authorities charged Henry Robinson's son, 25-year-old Adrien Robinson, with both murders. According to relatives, Adrien had shot his father in cold blood before running off into the woods and eventually stumbling upon the nuns' home. He was already inside the house when Lucy and Philomena returned home later that day. Adrien bound and gagged the women, then put them in their car and drove it to a hotel in Norfolk, Virginia. 2 days later, he left the hotel with Philomena, leaving Lucy behind. She alerted the hotel's front desk, who called the police and provided a description of the vehicle Adrien was driving. It was also soon discovered that Robinson had paid a stranger $50 to rent a hotel room in their name so he'd avoid having to use his own. He claimed that he was planning to stay there with his grandmother. A nationwide manhunt ensued, and law enforcement quickly caught up with Adrien, who ditched the car and attempted to flee on foot. Speaking with the Washington Post shortly after Adrien's capture, Norfolk police spokesman Chris Amos described the brutality of Philomena's murder as over the top. Chris added that he'd overheard a detective say that they'd never seen anything so bad. A psychiatrist diagnosed Adrien with paranoid schizophrenia, but concluded that he was competent to stand trial for the murders. Prosecutors initially intended to pursue the death penalty, but were met with strong opposition from the surviving nun, Lucy, the Catholic Church, and Adrien's family. Adrien pleaded guilty in a Virginia court to Philomena's kidnapping, murder, and mutilation, and received a sentence of life without parole plus 20 years. Then, in Georgia, he pleaded guilty to his father's murder, as well as kidnapping, armed robbery, and aggravated assault. He received more than 5 life sentences and is currently serving his time at a prison in Virginia. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Jeffrey Allen Maxwell. On what began as a normal day in March 2011, 63-year-old former school teacher Lois Pearson was viciously assaulted by her former neighbor, 58-year-old Jeffrey Allen Maxwell. She'd later describe how Maxwell sprayed something in her eyes, shackled her hands and feet, and struck her twice in the head while she fought desperately to get away. Pearson broke free and ran down the road in search of safety, but Maxwell caught up with her and forced her into his vehicle at gunpoint. For the next 12 days, Pearson endured sheer torture and humiliation at the hands of her captor, who suspended her on a deer-skinning device in his garage. Maxwell subjected Pearson to unspeakable abuse while keeping her inside a nearly airtight box and chained to a bed. He told the victim that he'd been hired to kill her, and she thought for sure that that was exactly what he was going to do. But police rescued Pearson from Maxwell's property, more than 100 miles from where she'd been abducted, after receiving a tip. Maxwell denied knowing Pearson, who claimed that he'd made unwanted advances toward her for years when they were next-door neighbors. She'd initially tried to be nice to Maxwell when he came by to visit, but she told him to stop coming around after he asked her to kiss him. Even after he moved away, he was apparently so angered by Pearson's rejection that he came back to exact revenge against her years later. A jury found Maxwell guilty of aggravated kidnapping and 2 counts of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to 3 life terms, including 2 that he's required to serve concurrently. His punishment ensures that he won't be eligible for parole until the age of 119. So it's unlikely he'll ever see freedom again. Number 9. Judge John McBain. In 2014, Camia Gannett was sentenced to life in the Michigan State prison system for violently stabbing and bludgeoning her boyfriend, Marcel Hill, to death. Throughout her trial, Gannett had argued that she acted in self-defense, but the court was clearly unconvinced. Judge John McBain described the crime as one of the worst cold-blooded murders he'd ever seen. As Hill's aunt addressed the court in a victim impact statement, Gannett rolled her eyes and laughed. She then interrupted the statement by asking, "Is that it?" At that point, Judge McBain stepped in and let Gannett know that she had taken her behavior too far. He ordered the convicted murderer to shut her mouth or he would have it covered with duct tape. McBain went on to say that he hopes Gannett dies in prison and that if Michigan were a death penalty state, she'd be getting the electric chair. Number 8. Judge Randy Rich. 28-year-old pizza delivery man Shane Varnador was shot dead on the job in Gwinnett County, Georgia in 2016. One of the suspects, Jermaine Young, was sentenced to life without parole. The killing was so heinous that Young's teenage accomplice, Reginald Lofton, was tried as an adult. But because of his age, a life sentence without parole would constitute cruel and unusual punishment under Georgia law. Lofton was sentenced to the maximum of life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He'll be around 45 years old when his first parole hearing comes up, which means that he could enjoy decades of freedom after committing a crime that puts most people behind bars for the rest of their lives, or at least until a very old age. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Randy Rich minced no words when it came to expressing his true feelings about the outcome of the case. Addressing Lofton directly, he said, "I wish I could give you more time than I can, because I think you're a cold-blooded killer. I hope you never get out of jail." Judge Rich remained calm. He didn't even raise his voice. But there was an unmistakable sincerity in his composed demeanor, and he was clearly frustrated with the limits put in place by the law, which prevented him from handing down a sentence that, in his opinion, would truly bring justice to the case. Number 7. Judge Bryant, Durham. In 2016, Denver Fenton Allen was accused of killing his inmate at the Floyd County Jail in Georgia. During a routine pretrial hearing that made national news, Allen repeatedly made crude remarks towards Judge Bryant Durham, who eventually got fed up and found the defendant in contempt of court. Allen responded by saying, "I don't care," sparking a bizarre back and forth of heated comments between the two. Durham replied, "I know you don't care." He sentenced Allen to 20 days for contempt and warned that if the defendant continued making obscene remarks, he'd add more time to the charge. Allen said, "F you," and the sentence was bumped up to 40 days. He said it again, and the judge increased the sentence to 60 days. The back and forth continued to the point where Judge Durham sentenced Allen to 10 years for contempt. Durham remarked that it was going to be an interesting trial, and that Allen was the rudest person he had ever met. Allen continued to make perverse and threatening statements, to which Durham replied that the defendant looked like a queer. When Allen accused the judge of calling him a homophobic slur in the courtroom, Durham said, "I didn't call you one, I said you looked like one." He went on to say that Allen had a constitutional right to be a dumbass. Tensions brewed to the point where Allen threatened in a very graphic manner to kill Durham's children. After asking a reporter if they were recording the exchange, Durham replied that he didn't have any kids, adding that Allen would find out how nasty I really am. The judge was widely criticized for lashing out and for his derogatory use of the word queer, and there were even calls for his removal from the bench. Durham publicly apologized and recused himself from the case, but remained on the bench for another 3 years. Number 6. Judge Aubrey Rymes. While facing a domestic violence charge in a Mississippi courtroom in 2021, 27-year-old Sidney Newsom broke free from the bailiff and threw a violent tantrum. Video of the outburst showed Judge Aubrey Rymes repeatedly ordering Newsom to leave the courtroom before a stack of papers flew through the air and smacked him in the face. Two clerical court workers fled as the bailiff wrestled Newsom to the ground just feet away from their desks. The handcuffed defendant once again overpowered the bailiff, then proceeded to pick up a phone and hurl it in the judge's direction, knocking over a computer screen. At that point, Judge Rymes had seen enough. He got out of his chair and approached Newsom as objects kept flying at his head and pinned the out-of-control suspect to a table. Rymes held Newsom down until 4 more officers arrived and hauled the combative defendant and his brother out of the courtroom. He then returned to his seat and resumed business as usual while his support staff cleaned up the mess that Newsom had made. Number 5. Judge Merrilee Ehrlich. After being rolled into a video court hearing in a wheelchair in 2018, Sandra Twiggs mentioned some of her medical ailments to Broward County, Florida Judge Merrilee Ehrlich. The frail 59-year-old suffered from asthma and COPD and explained that her conditions require breathing treatments. Twiggs remained calm as Ehrlich snapped at her, saying, "I'm not here to talk about your breathing treatments." Ehrlich continued to interrupt Twiggs when she tried to talk, with repeated orders to just listen. Twiggs couldn't get a word in edgewise, but the judge at least agreed to free her without bond on a domestic violence charge. As she explained that Twiggs would have to check in with the court office following her release, Ehrlich took the opportunity to slip in one final snide remark, stating, "You have to arrange for someone to carry you if you cannot get there yourself." Twiggs was so traumatized by how Ehrlich treated her that she had a panic attack every time she tried to tell her family about it. Her goddaughter, Carolyn Porter, told CBS that Twiggs was never the same in the short time she had with her loved ones following her release. She died just days after being freed. Ehrlich, who was scheduled to retire a few months later, promptly stepped down from the bench, and Broward Chief Administrative Judge Jack Tutor reassured the public that she wouldn't be back. Tutor condemned the disgraced judge's behavior and vowed to contact Twiggs' family to apologize for how Sandra was treated. Number 4. Judge Philip Kirk. Wisconsin defense attorney Michael D. Peterson became a defendant in 2015 when he was accused of lying to a client about a non-existent plea deal. And it wasn't just a one-time thing, according to Outagamie County Assistant District Attorney Andrew Meyer, who said he never promised some of the plea deals Peterson offered to defendants on his behalf. Peterson was convicted of contempt and was sentenced to a year of probation. As part of his punishment, Judge Philip Kirk required the disgraced attorney to specifically tell all his clients over the next year that he was a crook, a cheat, a thief, and a liar. The damaging disclosure was an unusual punishment since most judges avoid affecting a defendant's ability to work when possible. But Judge Kirk told Peterson that he didn't care if business went bad for him, stating, "I want you to have as much business as a pimp in a nursing home." He continued laying into Peterson in what Post-Crescent described as an R-rated diatribe, most of which was too inappropriate to print in the paper. It wasn't the first time Judge Kirk made the news for lashing out at a defendant. In 2011, he came under fire for some controversial comments he made during the sentencing of Delton Gorges, a school bus driver who was convicted of assault. Kirk openly doubted Gorges' claim that he was heterosexual, stating that if the defendant had suddenly become interested in men when it came to committing his crimes, that I must have looked ravishing in my prom dress this year. He also made a puzzling comment comparing the defendant to the smell of a jockstrap. Critics were quick to point out that Kirk's commentary had the effect of linking homosexuality with criminal activity, even if that wasn't what he meant to do. Number 3. Judge James D. Kane. Hurricane Laura was one of the strongest recorded hurricanes to ever make landfall in Louisiana. The Category 4 storm made landfall in August of 2020 and devastated the southwestern portion of the state. As expected, Louisiana courts received an influx of lawsuits from victims looking to sue their insurance companies for damage settlements. And as a longtime federal judge in the region, the Honorable James D. Kane is used to handling hurricane-related claims. He said that it's normal for a law firm to file anywhere from 200 to 300 cases after a storm, which is why he suspected something was off when one Houston-based firm filed over 1,400 cases over a 2-month period. During a review of the cases filed by McClenny, Mosley and Associates, the court found duplicate filings, cases that weren't even in the hurricane's path, and claims that had already been settled by other law firms. At a special hearing he called to address these issues, Kane asked the firm's representatives how they managed to consult so many people in such a short amount of time. One of the firm's partners, Zach Mosley, told the judge that the company utilized advanced AI technology to expedite its research process, and as a result, they helped a lot of people who would have otherwise missed the filing deadline and lost everything. Mosley maintained that the firm was doing its due diligence in each case, and clients testified that the lawyers were sufficiently keeping in contact. Judge Kane was unconvinced. He accused the firm of preying on hurricane victims and failing to properly research the claims it filed. In a no-nonsense tone, he said, "You've wasted judicial resources having to deal with your mess. You're not going to clog up my system." He went on to say, "Tell your partners in Houston to stay the frick out of my court with this kind of trash." Kane ordered a thorough review of each case and a $200 fine for each claim that was found to be ineligible to proceed in court. He concluded the hearing by warning the firm that he never wanted to see something like this happen again. Number 2. Judge Nicholas Gfus. In 2016, Facebook landed in U.S. federal court as the defendant in 2 major lawsuits representing 20,000 plaintiffs who accused the social media giant of facilitating terrorism. Thomas Alden Bircher II, a rookie lawyer for the firm defending Facebook, showed up for the scheduled initial conference about the cases at the U.S. District Court in Brooklyn, New York, and the judge wasn't happy. The Honorable Nicholas Gfus was appalled that the Manhattan-based firm, Kirkland & Ellis, would send anyone but a top partner to handle such major cases. He took his frustrations out on Bircher, who was admitted to the bar just 2 years earlier and had only been working for the firm for a year. Judge Gfus accused Kirkland & Ellis of being outrageous, irresponsible, and insulting, and said that Facebook had a social responsibility to resolve the complaints brought forward in the suits. Bircher replied that a lawsuit was not the proper vehicle for fixing the issue and was brushed off by the judge, who said, "I've been a lawyer for 41 years and a judge for 16. And I'm not having this discussion with you." When Bircher tried to explain that the lead counsel on the matter was addressing an out-of-state emergency regarding another case, Gfus fired back, "Maybe Kirkland & Ellis can scrounge up a partner who isn't busy in Texas to come see a lowly judge in the Eastern District of New York." With that, he ended the conference and rescheduled it for a later date. Number 1. Judge Elizabeth Shera. On Valentine's Day 2018, 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz opened fire on students and staff at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. He killed 17 people and injured 17 others. After dragging its heels through the court system for more than 4 years, his criminal case concluded with a guilty verdict. As the shooter's final hearing approached, Broward Public Defender Gordon Weeks asked Judge Elizabeth Shera to stop the victim's surviving family members from addressing the defense team in their impact statements. By then, the parents of several victims had openly criticized Chief Assistant Public Defender Melissa McNeil and had brought up her children in their statements. Naturally, prosecutors argued that the victims had the legal right to express themselves, and Shera agreed. Weeks persistently tried to convince the judge that the statements toward the defense team were inciting violence, but Shera remained unconvinced. She also pointed out that Public Defender McNeil opened the door to commentary about her children by bringing them up in her defense arguments. Shera told Weeks to sit down, but he told her not to dismiss him. She continued telling him to sit down. Weeks asked for a recess, but the judge denied it, and he walked away. Putting her foot down for the last time, Shera told Weeks that he was inappropriate and out of line, and once again ordered him to go sit down, adding that Cruz's sentencing would proceed as planned. Would you rather be on a plane that's forced to turn around mid-flight due to an unruly passenger, delaying your arrival to your vacation destination by a day, or spend a week vacationing next door to a couple who argue constantly? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.